People like you don't belong here. 5 words. That was all it took. Victoria Hayes looked at the worn leather vest, the heavy boots, the faded tattoos, and she smiled. Like she had already won. Like this man standing in front of her was nothing. But what Victoria didn't know, what nobody in that cafeteria knew, was that the man she was about to humiliate had already written a check to this university larger than her entire yearly salary. And he wasn't here for a fight. I was here because his daughter was crying. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The morning started like every other morning for Emma Carter. She woke up at 5:45, not because she wanted to, not because she was naturally a morning person. She woke up at 5:45 because that was the only time the shower on the 3rd floor of Hawthorne Hall was ever empty. If she waited until 6, she'd be standing in line behind 8 other girls, all of them rushing, all of them competing for hot water that ran out before the last person ever finished. So 5:45 it was. She wrapped her towel around herself, grabbed her basket of shower supplies, the cheap kind store brand shampoo and a bar of soap she stretched as long as humanly possible, and she padded down the hallway in her worn flip-flops. The left one slightly cracked along the strap, held together by a strip of duct tape she'd applied 2 months ago and hadn't gotten around to replacing. That was Emma Carter's life. Not glamorous, not Instagram-worthy, not the kind of college experience that got talked about at alumni brunches or featured in university brochures. But it was hers, and she was proud of it. She had earned every single square inch of her place at Westbridge University, and she never let herself forget that. On the days when the loneliness hit hardest, when she walked across the quad and watched groups of girls laughing in their matching sorority sweatshirts carrying coffee drinks that cost $9 each without blinking on those days, Emma would remind herself of something her father told her the night before she left home. He had stood in the driveway of their small house in Riverside, California, hands in his pockets, that look on his face he got when he was trying not to cry. She recognized it because she only ever saw it twice before. Once at her mother's funeral, and once the day Emma got her acceptance letter from Westbridge. "You know what the difference is between you and every rich kid at that school," he had said. Emma shook her head. "They're going there to maintain what they already have," he said. "You're going there to build something that doesn't exist yet. That's not a disadvantage, Em. That's the whole point." She had held on to those words for 3 years. They were the reason she got up at 5:45. They were the reason she logged 12, sometimes 14 hours of studying a week on top of her evening shifts at the campus library, where she shelved books and helped students find research materials, and occasionally got to sit behind the quiet checkout desk and read something for herself when the traffic slowed down. They were the reason she had somehow, against all odds, maintained a 3.87 GPA through her junior year. She was 21 years old, and she was building something that didn't exist yet. That morning after her shower, she dressed carefully. She had an exam in Dr. Reeves's advanced macroeconomics class at 10 o'clock, and she'd been studying for it for 9 days straight. Not casually studying, not flipping through flashcards while watching something on her laptop. Real studying, the kind where you sit at a desk with a single lamp on at midnight, and you read the same paragraph 6 times because you need to understand it at a cellular level, not just know it well enough to regurgitate it on a page. She felt good about the exam. She always felt good when she knew she'd actually prepared. The exam itself went the way she'd hoped. Not perfectly. There were 2 questions in the 3rd section she had to reason through, slowly, careful and methodical drawing from first principles rather than memorized formulas. But she finished with time to spare and walked out of the exam room with the quiet, private confidence of someone who knows they did the work. By noon, she was hungry. Actually hungry. The kind of bone-deep hunger that comes from waking up too early, pushing your brain past its comfortable limits, and not letting yourself stop for a proper meal because you had 15 more flashcards to review. She walked toward Morrison Hall, where the main university cafeteria was located, the premium dining facility, the one with the actual hot food in the expanded menu, and the salad bar that had things on it besides iceberg lettuce and croutons. She reached into her bag and pulled out her student ID card. Her father had upgraded her meal plan at the beginning of the semester. She remembered the conversation. She had called him to talk about the billing statement, trying to figure out if she should drop back to the basic plan to save money, and he had cut her off before she could finish the sentence. "Don't touch the meal plan," he said. "You need real food to think straight. You're not surviving on vending machine crackers while you're studying 15-hour days. Non-negotiable. Dad, the premium plan is almost $300 more per semester. I know what it costs, Em. That's money you could, Emma." His voice had gotten quiet in that way it did when he wasn't interested in debating anymore. "Let me do this, okay? Let me do this one thing." So she hadn't argued. She walked into the Morrison Hall cafeteria carrying her student ID and the quiet, settled confidence of someone who had paid for exactly what they were about to receive. The cafeteria was busy. It was always busy at noon. Students moved through the serving line, collecting trays, filling glasses, choosing between the 3 hot entrees the kitchen had prepared. The noise was warm, and layered conversations and laughter and the scrape of chairs against tile floors and the distant hum of industrial refrigerators behind the serving counter. Emma took her place in line. She was thinking about what she wanted to eat. She was thinking about whether she had time to check her email before her afternoon seminar. She was thinking in the comfortable, half-distracted way you think when the worst pressure of the day has just passed about whether she should call her dad tonight or wait until the weekend when they had more time to really talk. She was not thinking about what was about to happen. She reached the front of the line. Behind the counter stood Victoria Hayes. Emma had seen her before. Everyone who used the cafeteria regularly had seen Victoria Hayes. She was impossible to miss. Mid-40s, sharply dressed, even in a management uniform, with a way of standing that communicated very clearly that she considered the space around her to be her territory. She didn't serve food. She oversaw. She monitored. She walked the length of the serving counter like a general inspecting a front line, occasionally pulling a server aside to correct something, occasionally making a note on the clipboard she carried under one arm. She was not warm. She was not approachable. But she was technically just the cafeteria manager, which meant that as long as your student ID was valid and your meal plan was current, she had no authority over whether you ate. Emma stepped forward and held out her student ID. Victoria looked at it. Then she looked at Emma. Then she looked at Emma's clothes, the discount store jeans, the plain long-sleeve shirt that had been washed so many times the color had faded from dark navy to something closer to gray. The backpack with the fraying zipper. The slightly cracked flip-flop strap barely visible below the hem of her jeans. The look lasted only 2 seconds, but Emma felt it. She'd felt looks like that before. She had grown up in a world where people sometimes looked at her family like that, like they were adding something up. Running a quick calculation, deciding in advance what category to put them in before a single word had been spoken. She was used to it. She had learned to let it pass over her like water. But what happened next was not the look. "This plan isn't valid for this location," Victoria said. Flat, certain, barely looking at Emma anymore, already moving her gaze past her to the student behind her in line. Emma blinked. "I'm sorry, your meal plan," Victoria said with the patient, slightly condescending tone of someone explaining something very simple to someone they've already decided is not very bright. "It doesn't cover premium dining." "It does actually," Emma said. She kept her voice steady, polite. "I have the premium meal plan. My father upgraded it at the beginning of the semester. There should be a record." "I can see what's on your card," Victoria said, cutting her off. "And what I'm telling you is that it doesn't qualify you for this dining room." "That's not right," Emma said. She could feel the heat starting in her face. Not anger, not yet. Something closer to confusion mixed with the uncomfortable awareness that the people behind her in line were now watching. "Can you check again? Or maybe call someone from the billing office because I have the receipt." "I don't need to call anyone," Victoria said. Now her voice had dropped, just slightly, become a fraction quieter. More controlled, like she was being generous by not making this louder than it needed to be. "What I need is for you to step aside so the other students can move through the line." "I'm not stepping aside," Emma said quietly. "I paid for this meal plan." Victoria set down her clipboard. That was when the cafeteria got quieter. Not silent, but quieter. The way a room gets quieter when people sense something is about to happen, and they're trying to hear it without looking like they're watching. Victoria took 2 steps closer to Emma. "Let me be clear," she said. And her voice now had a different quality to it, smooth and controlled and carrying just enough edge to make clear that she was not asking. This dining room serves students who have invested in this university at a certain level. There is a dining hall on the east side of campus that would be more appropriate for your situation. The pause before those last two words was deliberate. Emma heard it. Everyone close enough heard it. My situation, Emma repeated. I'm sure you understand, Victoria said, and she actually smiled. Students like you should know your place. The cafeteria went quiet, not the polite quiet of before, a real quiet. The kind that happens when something shocking cuts through a room and everyone simultaneously needs a second to process what they just heard. Students at nearby tables had stopped eating. 3 people in line were staring. Someone had their phone out already angled at just a slight upward tilt recording without making it obvious they were recording. Victoria reached across the counter and picked up the food tray that a server had already begun preparing for Emma. She carried it to the trash can at the end of the serving station, and she dropped it in. Emma stood at the front of the line with nothing in her hands. She did not scream. She did not argue. She did not throw anything or demand to see anyone or do any of the things that her body was telling her in that immediate, visceral way that her body communicated under stress that she had every right to do. She stood there, and she held herself together with the particular kind of dignity that comes from knowing that falling apart in this room in front of these people would give Victoria exactly what she wanted. She took a breath. She turned and walked toward the cafeteria doors. She made it about halfway to the exit before the sound of her own heartbeat became too loud, and the heat in her face became too much to hold back, and her eyes filled up, and she stopped walking and just stood there in the middle of the room, pressing her lips together, refusing to let it go any further than her eyes. That was when the doors opened. Heavy boots. The sound of them on polished tile was different from any other sound in the room. Heavier, slower, deliberate. The sound of someone who had walked into difficult rooms before and had never once been in a hurry about it. The cafeteria doors swung wide and Michael Carter walked in. I was 42 years old, and he looked every year of it in the best possible way, the way that speaks of weather endured and weight carried and a life lived at full contact with its own reality. He was tall, broad-shouldered. He had blonde hair that had gone lighter at the temples with threads of gray, and a thick beard that was trimmed close but not neat in any way that suggested he spent time thinking about it. He wore heavy black boots, dark jeans worn almost white at the knees, and over his flannel shirt, he wore the vest. The faded black leather vest, with the patch across the back. Hell's Angels. The cafeteria reacted the way cafeterias always react when something unexpected walks through the door. In stages. First, the people closest to the entrance noticed, and they went quiet. Then the quiet spread outward like a ripple across water, each table picking it up from the one behind it, until the entire room had shifted into a different register. People looked. People whispered. Several students pushed their chairs back slightly from their tables in unconscious physical reaction to something they'd assessed as unpredictable. Michael Carter did not appear to notice any of it. He stepped into the cafeteria and his eyes moved across the room in one slow scanning pass, the way experienced eyes move when they're looking for something specific in a crowded space. He found it. He found Emma standing in the middle of the floor. Her eyes wet her hands, pressed flat against the front of her jeans. Her jaw set in a way he recognized because she had his jaw, and she held tension in it exactly the way he did. Michael's expression didn't change. He walked toward his daughter. The crowd parted without anyone deciding to part. It just happened the way crowds happen, bodies shifting sideways slightly as he passed, conversations stopping mid-sentence. He reached Emma and he put his hand on her shoulder. "Hey," he said quietly. "Dad." Her voice came out, smaller than she intended. "I know," he said. "Look at me." She looked up. "You did nothing wrong," he said. "You hear me? Nothing. Nothing." Emma nodded. It was a small nod, but it was enough. Michael turned around. He looked at the cafeteria, at the people watching, at the server behind the counter who was staring at her shoes, at the trash can at the end of the serving station where Emma's meal was sitting in a heap. And then he looked at Victoria Hayes. Victoria had not moved from her position behind the counter. She was holding her clipboard again, and she was wearing the expression of a person who had made a calculation and felt confident in it, who saw the leather vest and the tattoos and the biker image, and believed based on all of those visible things that she still had every advantage in this situation. She did not yet understand what was happening. Michael walked toward the counter. He was not rushing. He was not stomping. There was nothing theatrical about his approach. He walked the way he always walked, like a man who was exactly where he had decided to be and had no particular opinion about whether the world approved. He stopped at the counter and looked directly at Victoria. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Victoria tilted her chin upward slightly. "Excuse me, why did you throw away my daughter's meal?" Victoria looked at him. Then she did the same thing she had done to Emma. She ran her eyes over him, the quick inventory, head to boots, and back, taking in every visible piece of information and filing it into the categories she had already prepared. And then she smiled, not a friendly smile, the other kind. The kind that communicates something it isn't brave enough to actually say out loud. "Your daughter," she repeated. And the word came out shaped slightly wrong, as if the concept itself surprised her in a way she found faintly amusing. "My daughter," Michael said, "Emma Carter. She's a junior here. She's got a premium meal plan. She came in here to eat lunch. You threw her food in the trash and told her she didn't belong here. I'd like to understand why." "This is a premium dining facility," Victoria said, "and we have standards to maintain." "She paid for the premium plan," Michael said. "I've got the receipt on my phone if you'd like to see it." "Sir," Victoria said, and now she was using the voice, the particular register of professional courtesy that is really just condescension wearing a collared shirt. "I'd suggest that you remove yourself from this establishment before I'm forced to involve campus security." "I'm not threatening anyone," Michael said calmly. "I'm asking a straightforward question. My daughter had a valid meal plan. Her food got thrown away. I want to know why." "What I'd suggest," Victoria said, setting down her clipboard again, "is that people like you," and this time the emphasis was unmistakable, sitting heavy on those two words, the same way it had sat on them when she'd aimed them at Emma, "understand that this university operates at a certain standard, and not everyone is suited to every space." The cafeteria had gone completely quiet. Not a fork scraping a plate, not a chair leg shifting against the floor, nothing. Every person in the room was watching. Michael Carter stood at the counter and said nothing for 4 full seconds. That was the moment, the one that half a dozen students would later describe in detail to their friends and roommates, and in the comment sections of the videos they would post, when everything in the room shifted, when the energy changed, when Victoria's confident smile began almost imperceptibly to falter. Because Michael did not get angry. He did not raise his voice. He looked at Victoria with an expression that was completely still, and he said, "Before you make another decision here, I'd strongly recommend calling the university president." Victoria laughed. It was a short laugh, dismissive. "I don't think that's going to be necessary." "I think it is," Michael said. "Sir, I'm calling security." "That's your right," Michael said. "Call whoever you want, but make sure the president is in that conversation." Victoria reached for her phone. She pressed the number for campus security, and Michael Carter stood where he was, perfectly still, hands at his sides, waiting. Not like a man who was worried about what came next, but like a man who already knew. Which was the part that should have scared Victoria Hayes, because there is a very specific kind of stillness that belongs to people who know how a story ends, and Michael Carter had it. Security arrived 4 minutes later. 2 officers. They came through the cafeteria door and took one look at the situation, at the man in the Hells Angels vest, standing at the counter, at the crowd of students watching with phones angled just slightly upward at Victoria Hayes, pointing in Michael's direction with the particular urgency of someone who believes she's the victim of a situation she caused. And they made the same mistake Victoria made. They saw the vest. They saw the tattoos. They saw the biker. And they walked toward him with their hands slightly raised, the way you approach something you've decided is unpredictable. "Sir," said the taller of the 2 officers, "we're going to need you to come with us." "I understand," Michael said pleasantly. "Can you do me one favor first?" "Sir." "One favor," Michael said. "Call Dr. Bennett, Richard Bennett, the president of this university. Tell him Michael Carter is in the Morrison Hall cafeteria and would appreciate a few minutes of his time." The officer hesitated. He glanced at his partner. His partner shrugged slightly, the universal nonverbal for "I have no idea." "Why would the president?" the first officer started. "Because he'll want to know," Michael said simply. "That's all. Just make the call." The officer looked at Michael again. looked at the cafeteria full of watching students, looked at Victoria Hayes, who was nodding vigorously at him to just remove this man from the building. And something in the officer's professional training clicked in, because the man standing in front of him was not afraid. Dampitarian was not nervous, was not acting like someone who expected to lose. The officer took a step back and pulled out his radio. Victoria's confident smile tightened slightly at the edges. And in the middle of the cafeteria, Emma Carter watched her father stand alone in a room full of people who had already decided what he was, and she thought about the night in the driveway, about the look on his face when he was trying not to cry, about what he'd said about building something that didn't exist yet. She pressed her lips together, she squared her shoulders, and she waited, because she had lived with Michael Carter for 21 years, and she already knew what was coming. Time. What nobody in that cafeteria understood yet was that the worn leather vest and the Hells Angels patch were only part of the story. The part that Victoria could see, the part she'd used to build her whole case. But there was a larger story underneath it, one that had been running quietly for years, woven into the foundation of this very university, and when it finally came to the surface, it was going to change everything. Not just for Emma, not just for Victoria, for every student who had ever sat in this cafeteria and felt like they didn't belong. The radio crackled. The security officer, his name tag read, Harris stepped back 3 feet from Michael and spoke quietly into the receiver. His partner, a younger guy named Tran, stood slightly to the left with his arms crossed, still watching Michael with the careful attention of someone who hadn't quite made up his mind yet about what kind of situation this was. Victoria Hayes stood behind the counter with her clipboard pressed against her chest like a shield. She was still smiling. Barely. The kind of smile that a person holds on to when they're starting to feel the ground shift slightly beneath them, but aren't ready to admit it yet. The cafeteria around them was still quiet in that particular way. Not the comfortable quiet of a room at rest, but the electric, held breath quiet of a room, watching something unfold that it cannot look away from. Students sat at their tables with forks paused halfway to their mouths. 3 people near the window had their phones out openly, now not even pretending. A girl at the table closest to the serving counter had turned her chair completely around, so she was facing the confrontation directly, as though she decided she was watching a show and she was going to watch it properly. Officer Harris lowered his radio. He looked at Michael, then he looked at Victoria. Then he said something that nobody expected him to say. Ma'am, the president's office is asking us to hold the situation until Dr. Bennett can get here. Victoria's smile slipped 1 centimeter. I'm sorry, she said. The president's office, Harris repeated, and there was something different in his voice now. A careful neutrality that had replaced the earlier confidence. The professional instinct of a man who could sense without knowing the specifics that he had almost made a significant mistake. They want us to wait. That's completely unnecessary, Victoria said. This man walked in here uninvited and he's a student's parent, ma'am, Tran said quietly. Not aggressively, just stating a fact. He walked in here and began threatening my staff. I didn't threaten anyone, Michael said, and his voice was so calm it almost sounded gentle. I asked a question. That's all I did. I walked in, I saw my daughter standing in the middle of this room with tears in her eyes, and I asked what her food was thrown in the trash. If that's a threat, then I don't know what we're calling things anymore. A student at a nearby table, a heavy-set guy in a Westbridge athletics sweatshirt, let out a sound. Not quite a laugh, something between agreement and discomfort. The girl who had turned her chair around nodded slightly, like a point had been scored. Victoria's jaw tightened. That is not what happened, she said. Then tell me what happened, Michael said. I'm listening. Your daughter was informed politely that her meal plan did not qualify her for this dining room. She has the premium plan. That is a matter of record that would need to be reviewed by the billing office. I have the receipt on my phone right now, Michael said. September 4th, $312 for the semester premium upgrade. Paid in full. You want me to pull it up? Victoria said nothing. Because I'll pull it up, Michael said. Right now, right here. The girl who had turned her chair around leaned toward the girl sitting next to her and whispered something. The other girl covered her mouth with her hand. Emma was standing at the edge of it all, slightly behind and to the left of her father, and she was watching Victoria's face with an attention she couldn't quite describe. It wasn't satisfaction, it wasn't triumph, it was something more complicated, the feeling of watching someone finally be asked to account for something that everyone around them had learned to simply absorb. Because Emma was not the first. She knew she wasn't the first. There was a girl named Priya who had told Emma 6 weeks ago in the quiet of the library stacks that she had been turned away from Morrison Hall twice in 1 week, different reasons each time. Once her card didn't scan correctly. Once the system was experiencing issues. Priya had stopped trying after the second time. She just started eating at the smaller dining hall on the east side of campus, the one with the limited menu and the fluorescent lighting that buzzed faintly at a frequency that gave you a headache if you stayed too long. There was a boy named Marcus who had told Emma that a Morrison Hall server had informed him the pasta dish he was reaching for was running low and that he might want to choose something else and then watch the same pasta get served to the next 3 students behind him without a word. Emma had filed these stories in the part of her brain where she put things she couldn't fix, the part that got heavier every semester. But standing here now, watching her father ask questions that had apparently never been asked out loud in this room, she felt that weight differently. Not lighter, but different, like the shape of it was changing. The billing office is closed on Fridays, Michael said. I know that because I called when I made the payment to confirm everything went through. Spoke to a woman named Patricia. She confirmed the upgrade. She told me Emma would have full access to Morrison Hall for the academic year. He paused. So we can wait for billing to open on Monday. Or you can tell me right now what the actual reason was for throwing my daughter's food in the trash. Victoria said, I don't have to justify our operating procedures to who? Michael asked. The question landed quietly, but it landed. Victoria stopped. Because there it was, the answer she couldn't say out loud, sitting right there at the surface of the sentence she'd left unfinished, visible to everyone in the room. To who? To someone like you. To a man who looks like you, dressed like you, who showed up at this university wearing what you're wearing. Everyone heard the unfinished sentence. The cafeteria felt it. Harris, the security officer, looked at this floor for a moment. Then he looked at Michael. Then he seemed to make a small internal decision, the kind that doesn't announce itself loudly, but shows up later in how a person acts. Why don't we all just wait, he said, and this time it wasn't a question directed at Michael. It was directed at Victoria. The president's office said 5 minutes. Victoria's knuckles were white around the clipboard. She wanted to push back. Emma could see it, the tightening at the corners of her eyes, the slight set of her shoulders, the way her weight shifted forward like someone preparing to argue. But something was stopping her, some professional instinct, some faint alarm from somewhere in the back of her mind that was finally beginning to suggest that the ground she was standing on might not be as solid as she'd assumed. She stepped back. She said nothing. And for the 4 minutes that followed, the cafeteria existed in a state of suspended tension. Students slowly resumed eating, but quietly. Conversations started back up, but in lowered voices. 2 students near the back got up from their table and walked casually closer to the front of the room, as though they'd suddenly remembered they needed a drink refill and just happened to position themselves with a clear line of sight to the counter. Emma stood next to her father. She didn't speak. Neither did he. But at one point, Michael shifted slightly to the left, and his arm came up, and he put it around her shoulders, not dramatically, not like a statement, just the way a parent puts their arm around their kid. And Emma felt the exact specific quality of safety that only exists in that gesture, that particular wordless communication that says, I have you. Whatever happens next, I have you. She had not felt that in a long time. Not because Michael wasn't present in her life. He called every Sunday. He sent voice messages on Tuesday nights because he knew Tuesday was always her hardest day of the week. Something about the Tuesday scheduling of her most difficult classes, combined with the midweek energy dip, made Tuesdays feel like running through sand. He never missed a Tuesday. But he was 400 miles away in Riverside, and there is a version of safety that only exists when someone is physically beside you. And Emma had been running without that version for 3 years. She let herself lean into it. Just slightly, just for a moment. Then the cafeteria doors opened again, and everything changed. Dr. Richard Bennett was 61 years old with white hair, in a way of moving through spaces that was confident without being aggressive, the particular ease of someone who had occupied positions of authority for long enough that authority had become simply the water he swam in. He wore a dark blazer and a university lanyard, and he came through the cafeteria doors at a brisk pace, clearly mid-stride from wherever he'd been when the call came in. He scanned the room. His eyes moved from Harris to Tran to the crowd of watching students and then to the man standing at the serving counter in the Hells Angels vest. Victoria Hayes straightened. She composed her expression into something she hoped looked like the calm, professional face of a manager who had appropriately handled a difficult situation. She prepared the version of events she had been quietly refining in her head for the past 4 minutes. She opened her mouth. Dr. Bennett walked past her. He walked directly to Michael Carter and extended his hand. And he said, "Michael, I'm so sorry. I came as soon as I heard." The cafeteria made a sound, not words, a sound. The specific collective intake of breath that happens when a room full of people simultaneously recalibrates everything it thought it understood about a situation. Victoria Hayes did not move. She stood behind the counter and she watched the university president shake hands with the man in the Hells Angels vest, warmly with both hands the way you greet someone you know and respect. And the clipboard she'd been holding slipped from her fingers and hit the counter with a sharp crack that made 3 people flinch. "Richard," Michael said, shaking his hand, "I appreciate you coming down." Of course, of course." Dr. Bennett turned slightly. His eyes went to Emma, and his expression shifted into something genuine and concerned. "Emma, I'm sorry this happened to you here. That should never have happened." Emma blinked. "You know my name?" "I do," Dr. Bennett said. And there was something in his voice, not performative, not managed, but actually direct. "Your father has been a very important part of this institution for several years. I should have introduced myself properly a long time ago. That's on me." Emma looked at her father. Michael was looking at the floor for just a second, the way he looked when he was slightly uncomfortable with gratitude or praise, a brief contained expression. She had seen 1,000 times whenever someone thanked him for something he considered simply the right thing to do. "What does that mean?" Emma said quietly. "What does important part of the institution mean?" Dr. Bennett looked at Michael. Michael said, "No," she said, "tell me." And that was the moment, the first crack in the shape of what Emma thought she knew, the first piece of the larger story beginning to surface. Dr. Bennett said, "Your father has been a primary donor to the Westbridge Scholarship Endowment for 6 years. He's funded 11 full scholarships. He's covered emergency financial aid for 23 students who were within weeks of having to withdraw. He pays for it through his company, quietly without his name on any of the public materials, because that's how he wanted it." The cafeteria had gone quiet again. Completely this time. Even the kitchen sounds had died down, as if the people in the back had somehow sensed that something was being said in the front of the room that required silence. Emma looked at her father. Michael was still looking at the floor. 11 scholarships, she said. He nodded once. For 6 years, another nod, smaller. "Dad," her voice broke on the word, not dramatically, just the clean, precise break of something that had been holding under pressure for a very long time. "Why didn't you never told me?" "Didn't need to," he said quietly. "That's not why I did it." Victoria Hayes was standing 8 feet away, listening to all of this, and her face had gone a color that had nothing to do with embarrassment alone. It was something deeper, the color that comes when a person realizes they have not simply made an error, but have performed their worst self on a stage in front of everyone they needed to impress. The man she had called a people like you, the man whose daughter she had told to know her place, was the reason 23 students at this university still had a place to be. Harris, the security officer, was looking at his shoes. Tron had taken 3 quiet steps backward, as if physical distance from the serving counter might retroactively separate him from his initial assumptions. The girl who had turned her chair around was now openly recording. Openly. Phone held up, making no pretense about it. "Mr. Carter," Victoria said. Michael looked at her. I wasn't aware," she started. "I know you weren't," Michael said. And somehow the fact that he said it without anger, without even the satisfaction that most people would not have been able to keep out of their voice at that moment, made it worse. Not for him, for her. "The thing is," Michael said, and now he was speaking in a way that seemed no longer directed only at Victoria, but at the room, the way a person speaks when they understand that the moment has expanded beyond the original argument. "Whether you knew who I was or not shouldn't have mattered. You didn't throw my daughter's food in the trash because of anything in her file or her billing record. I think everyone in this room knows that. Nobody argued with him, not even Victoria. Older Dr. Bennett said, "Victoria, I think we need to step into my office." "Of course," she said, and her voice came out half the size it had been 40 minutes earlier. "Of course." She walked from behind the counter and she passed within 4 feet of Emma, and she did not make eye contact. She couldn't, because there was nothing to say that could be arranged into an expression appropriate for this moment. And somewhere underneath the training and the professional management manner and the armor of daily small cruelties that she had built up without quite knowing she was building it, Victoria Hayes was encountering something she had not expected to encounter today. Herself, the actual version, the one that existed underneath the clipboard in the expensive management uniform, in the belief that certain people took up too much space in certain rooms. Dr. Bennett touched Emma's arm briefly before he followed. "I'll be in touch with you directly about this, Emma. I want you to know that what happened today will not be left unaddressed." Emma nodded. The three of them left the cafeteria. Harrison Tran followed at a distance. The doors swung shut. And the cafeteria erupted, not into chaos, into noise. The sudden release noise of 200 people simultaneously exhaling and speaking and pulling up social media on their phones and turning to their neighbors with the high-volume energy of a crowd that has just witnessed something they cannot yet fully categorize but know immediately that they will be talking about for a very long time. Emma stood in the middle of it and felt it wash over her like a wave. Michael stood beside her, slightly rumpled, completely unmoved by the noise and attention in the way of someone who had never required an audience for anything he did. "Dad," Emma said, "yeah, 11 scholarships. You have been writing checks to this school for 6 years and you never told me." I was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You remember when you were about 16 and you got really into that idea that you wanted to go to college out of state? And we sat at the kitchen table and went through everything, all the numbers, what it would actually take." "Yeah," Emma said. "You didn't ask me to help you. You just told me what you were going to do to make it happen yourself. You laid out the plan, the grades you'd need, the applications, the scholarships you'd apply for. You had it all written down." He paused. "You were 16. You were sitting at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, and you had it all figured out." Emma pressed her hand over her mouth. "I wasn't going to take that from you," Michael said. "You earning your place here, that's real. That belongs to you. Nothing I did changes that." He looked at her steadily. "But I could make sure there was a place for you and people like you to come to. That part I could do." Emma put her arms around him. She did not say anything for a while. She didn't need to. Some things don't require words to be fully understood, and this was one of them. A daughter understanding her father not in a new way but in a deeper way, the same shape but suddenly with more dimension, the way a photograph becomes real when you see the place it was taken with your own eyes. Around them, the cafeteria hummed with noise and reaction. Phones were already sending video files across campus servers. Group chats were lighting up. Someone had already typed out a description of the confrontation in the university's student forum and posted it before Michael had even finished his conversation with the president. Comments were piling up below it in real-time, students reading on their phones at the lunch tables and at library carols and in the hallways between classes. People who had not been in the room discovering what had happened by the same compressed, instantaneous communication that meant no event of any significance could remain contained to the room it happened. Not anymore. Not in any university on earth. But that was happening outside Emma's awareness. Inside her awareness, there was only her father's arms around her and the smell of engine grease and leather that she had associated with safety since she was 3 years old, and the understanding that she had been standing alone in rooms for 3 years when she hadn't needed to be. Not because the people who loved her were absent, but because some distances are measured in things other than miles. A voice broke through. "Hey, Emma." She pulled back from her father and turned. A young man was standing a few feet away. She recognized him. Daniel Brooks, an accounting junior she had exchanged maybe 12 words with in the past 2 years, usually in passing near the library. He was holding his phone in one hand and had the look of someone who had been building up to saying something and had just made the decision to say it. I know this isn't the best time," he said, "but I need to talk to someone about what just happened, or not just what happened today, about what's been going on in here for a while." Michael looked at him. "What do you mean?" Daniel glanced at the cafeteria doors, the ones Dr. Bennett and Victoria had gone through, then back at Michael. He took a breath. "I've been keeping records," he said. "I'm an accounting major. It's what I do. And I've been tracking inconsistencies in the meal plan processing for this dining hall for almost 4 months." He looked at Emma. "You're not the only one this happened to. Not even close. And I've got the numbers to prove it." Emma stared at him. Michael said quietly, "What kind of numbers?" Daniel looked at the doors again. Then he said, "The kind that explain why Victoria Hayes was always so certain about who did and didn't belong in this room. And it wasn't about meal plan levels." He swallowed. "It was about something else entirely." The cafeteria noise continued around them, but in this small circle the air had changed again. Gone tight and charged the way air does when a door is about to open onto something larger than anyone expected. Michael said, "Tell me everything." And Daniel Brooks, accounting junior quiet keeper of numbers, the person who had spent 4 months staring at data that told a story no one had been asking to hear, sat down at the nearest table, opened the folder on his phone, and began. What he showed them changed everything. Not just about Morrison Hall, not just about Victoria Hayes, about where the money had been going and about how long it had been happening. Daniel Brooks had the kind of hands that never stopped moving when he was nervous. He sat at the cafeteria table and his fingers moved across his phone screen with the rapid practiced certainty of someone who had been living inside these numbers for so long that he could navigate them the way other people navigated familiar streets without thinking, without hesitation, by pure muscle memory. Michael sat across from him. Emma sat beside her father. The cafeteria noise continued around them like a river flowing past a stone, and the three of them existed inside their own separate pocket of silence, while Daniel pulled up what he needed to show them. "Okay," Daniel said, and his voice had the slightly elevated quality of controlled adrenaline, the voice of someone who has been waiting for this conversation and is now terrified that it's actually happening. "I need to preface this by saying that I didn't start doing this because I thought I'd find anything. I started because I'm an accounting major, and I have a problem where I notice when numbers don't add up, and these numbers, they kept not adding up. And once you see it, you can't unsee it." "Show me," Michael said. Daniel turned the phone so Michael could see the screen. On it was a spreadsheet, not a professional one, not something produced by the university's administrative software, but a careful hand-built document in a free app. The kind of meticulous record-keeping that is its own form of testimony. Columns of dates, student ID numbers, meal plan codes, transaction records, dollar amounts, notations in a small, cramped font that Daniel had clearly typed with his thumbs over many weeks. "Morrison Hall runs 3 tiers of meal service," Daniel said. "Basic, standard, and premium. And the premium tier costs $312 per semester extra, like Emma's. It covers full access to this dining hall, the expanded menu, unlimited visits." He scrolled. "Now, the way the system is supposed to work is simple. You swipe your card, the register reads your tier, you get what your tier allows. Automatic. No human judgment required." "But," Michael said, "but the system also has a manual override function," Daniel said. "For legitimate reasons, if someone's card malfunctions, if there's a scanning error, if a student's payment is pending, the manager on duty can manually approve or deny access. It logs in the system as a manager decision, not a system decision." He looked up. Victoria Hayes made 417 manual override decisions in the last 14 weeks. Emma said 417. "The previous manager in this position averaged 11 per semester," Daniel said. 11 total for the entire academic semester. Michael leaned back slightly in his chair. He said nothing, but his jaw had set. "That alone is an anomaly," Daniel said. "A massive one. But I kept going. I cross-referenced the override decisions with the student ID numbers. And I found a pattern." He scrolled again. "The denials, the manual decisions to reject a student's premium access, they clustered. Not random, not spread evenly across different students in different days. They clustered around specific IDs. And when I pulled the demographic data that's publicly available through the university's own diversity reporting, I found that the denied IDs belonged overwhelmingly to scholarship students. First-generation students, students whose financial aid packages were on public record as coming from low-income backgrounds." The table was completely quiet. Emma was staring at the phone screen. She was reading the columns, following the numbers, and somewhere in her chest something was tightening. Not a new tightness, not a tightness she'd never felt before, but a familiar one that was now acquiring the specific unbearable quality of being confirmed. Of having a suspicion you'd told yourself was paranoia turn out to be simply accurate. She was doing it on purpose, Emma said. The data says yes, Daniel said. I can't prove intent from a spreadsheet, but the pattern is it's not subtle. A statistician would look at this distribution and tell you the probability of it occurring by chance is less than 1%. Michael said, you said the numbers don't add up. What do you mean by that? You mean the access denials? Daniel hesitated. That hesitation lasted 2 seconds, but it was weighted. Emma noticed it. Michael noticed it. The hesitation of someone who was about to say the thing they've been most reluctant to say, not because they're unsure of it, but because saying it out loud will make it real in a way that it currently isn't, and some part of them is still not sure they're ready for that. There's more, Daniel said. Tell me, Michael said. Daniel pulled up a second document. This one was more complex columns of transaction data with highlighted cells, color-coded, in a system that Daniel had clearly developed himself, red and yellow and green markers, that told a story in the aggregate even before you read the individual entries. The premium meal plans generate revenue, Daniel said. $312 times the number of students enrolled in the premium tier. That money goes into the Dining Services Operational Fund, which is managed through the university's financial systems, standard accounting. He pointed at a column of highlighted cells. Except that when I pulled the public financial disclosures, which the university is required to post quarterly, the reported premium enrollment numbers don't match the actual enrollment numbers I can see in the student services database. Michael was very still. The reported numbers are lower, Daniel said, significantly lower, which means money is coming in from premium plan payments, real money, real students paying the upgrade fee, but the reported enrollment is showing fewer students than actually paid. He looked at Michael directly. The difference between what was collected and what was reported over the past 3 semesters is approximately $47,000. The number sat on the table between them like something physical. Emma said, $47,000. Give or take, Daniel said. I'm an accounting student, not a forensic auditor. My numbers could be off by a margin, but even if I'm off by 20%, that's still almost $40,000 that is somewhere, not where it should be. Michael said, have you shown this to anyone? No, Daniel said. Why not? Daniel looked at him with an expression that was equal parts embarrassed and exhausted, the expression of someone who is about to explain something that should be obvious and that the explaining of it will itself be a kind of pain. Because she's the manager, he said. Because she has the authority to decide who eats in this room and who doesn't. Because 3 students I know of who tried to formally complain about their access being denied got tangled up in administrative review processes that seemed to go nowhere. And one of them, a girl named Sophia, she was a sophomore. She ended up dropping to the basic meal plan just to stop the back and forth because it was taking time she didn't have. She told me it wasn't worth fighting. He paused. When the person you need to report something to is the same person you're reporting, and they have more institutional power than you do, and you're a scholarship student who cannot afford to make enemies in the administration, you calculate the risk. You keep records instead of making noise. You wait. You were waiting for the right moment, Emma said. I was waiting for someone with more power than me to walk through the door, Daniel said simply. And then he looked at Michael with the direct, uncomplicated honesty of someone who had stopped trying to be strategic, which apparently just happened. Michael looked at the spreadsheet for a long moment. Then he looked at Daniel. You put 4 months into this, he said. I put 4 months into it because I watch it happen to people I know, Daniel said. I watched Priya eat bad cafeteria food on the east side for a whole semester because she got tired of being turned away from here. I watched Marcus get told the pasta was running low, while 3 people behind him got it without a word. I watched it happen over and over, and I kept thinking someone with a platform needs to see this. Someone who can actually do something. You did the right thing, Michael said, and I want you to know that what you've built here, he gestured at the phone, matters. This is real evidence. Do you have this backed up? 3 places, Daniel said immediately. Cloud storage, my laptop, and a USB drive in my apartment. Michael nodded. Something in his expression settled the particular settling of a person who has just confirmed that the foundation they're about to build on is solid. Good. Don't share it with anyone yet. Not until we know who the right people are to share it with. Emma had been quiet for a minute. Now she said, Dad. Michael looked at her. If she's been doing this for 3 semesters, that's before I even upgraded my meal plan. That's before today had anything to do with me. Yeah, Michael said. Then today, what happened to me today, that was just a Tuesday for her. Michael said nothing, but his expression said everything. And Emma felt something shift inside her. Not the clean, manageable anger of a wrong done specifically to her, which she could hold, which she knew how to hold, but the larger, heavier, more complicated weight of understanding that what had happened to her was the visible surface of something that had been happening beneath the surface for a very long time to people who had no one to walk through the door for them. Her throat tightened in a way that had nothing to do with self-pity. She thought of Priya, eating in the East Dining Hall with the buzzing lights, not because she chose to, because she calculated the cost of fighting and decided she couldn't afford it. She thought of Sophia, who dropped her premium plan just to make the administrative friction stop. She thought of Marcus and the pasta. And she thought in the sudden, clear, almost vertiginous way that certain thoughts arrive when the mind finally connects things. It has been keeping in separate rooms that she had been calculating costs her entire time at Westbridge. Every interaction, every space she walked into, every table she chose or didn't choose, every moment she decided to absorb something rather than push back against it, because the energy cost of pushing back was energy she couldn't afford to spend. She had thought of it as being practical. She had told herself it was strength, the ability to keep moving without needing every wrong to be righted in real time. But sitting here with Daniel's spreadsheet in her view and her father's solid presence beside her, she understood that there was a version of that calculation that wasn't strength at all. That was just endurance, just survival. And those are not the same thing. I want to go with you, Emma said. Michael looked at her. To Bennett's office. Yes. She did this to me, Emma said. I'm the one who was standing at that counter. I'm not going to sit in the cafeteria while you go handle it. A beat. Michael said, You sure? Sure, I'm sure. He nodded once. Then he looked at Daniel. Come with us. Daniel blinked. Me. You've got the evidence. You should be in the room when we show it. Daniel looked at his phone, then at Michael, then at Emma. He had the expression of someone who had been preparing for something in theory and is now confronting it in reality and discovering that theory and reality share a shape, but not a texture. Yeah, he said. Okay, yeah. The 3 of them stood up. The cafeteria noticed. It always notices when something moves with purpose in a room that has been watching. Students track them with their eyes as they cross toward the exit, some openly, some in the peripheral, careful way of people who want to see without looking like they're watching. The girl who had been openly recording lowered her phone for just a moment as they passed. She looked at Emma, and she said quietly enough that only Emma could hear, Whatever happens in there, good luck. Emma looked at her. She didn't know her name. She'd seen her around the way you see people around in a place you've occupied for 3 years without quite connecting with faces that are familiar, without being known. Thank you, Emma said, and then they went through the doors. Dr. Bennett's office was on the 3rd floor of the administration building, a 7-minute walk from Morrison Hall. The 3 of them made it in 5. Michael walked the way he always walked, and Emma matched his pace, and Daniel kept up slightly breathlessly, his phone clutched in both hands, his eyes moving rapidly in the way of someone who was running mental simulations of a conversation they were about to have. The outer office had a secretary, a woman in her 50s named Margaret, who had been managing Dr. Bennett's schedule for 11 years, and who had in those 11 years developed a nearly perfect ability to read the emotional weather of whatever walked through the door. She looked at Michael's vest and did not flinch. She looked at Emma's face and recognized something in it. She picked up her phone and said, Dr. Bennett, they're here. And then she looked up and said, Go right in. Victoria Hayes was already in the office. She was seated in one of the 2 chairs arranged in front of Bennett's desk, and she had evidently been speaking when the door opened because she stopped mid-sentence, and the expression she turned on the door had the startled quality of someone who expected the cavalry and got the opposite. She had not expected Emma. She had not expected Daniel. She had especially not expected Daniel because she knew Daniel's face. Emma could see the flicker of recognition, and beneath it, the flicker of something else. Something that moved too fast to name, but carried the texture of fear across Victoria's features in the half-second before she composed herself. Dr. Bennett stood up behind his desk. "Please come in, sit down." There was one chair left. Emma took it. Michael stood. Daniel stood beside Michael holding his phone like it was something breakable and important, which it was. "I want to first say," Victoria began, directing herself toward Dr. Bennett and slightly away from the others, the conversational geometry of someone trying to reestablish the terms of a situation, "that I handled today's incident according to established protocol, and that any suggestion that my decisions were motivated by anything other than policy enforcement is Victoria," Dr. Bennett said. She stopped. "Let's hear from everyone," he said, quietly, firmly. The voice of a man who has chaired enough difficult meetings to know when someone is trying to get ahead of a narrative and who is not going to allow it. Victoria pressed her lips together. Michael said, "Dr. Bennett, you know why I'm here. Emma's situation today was what brought me to campus, but there's a larger issue that needs to be addressed, and it's been going on for considerably longer than today." He nodded at Daniel. "This is Daniel Brooks. He's an accounting student. He'd like to show you something." Daniel stepped forward and held out his phone, and he began to walk Dr. Bennett through the spreadsheet. He was precise. He was methodical. He spoke in the careful step-by-step cadence of someone who had rehearsed this explanation 100 times in his own head and was now delivering it with the controlled urgency of someone who understands that the next 5 minutes will determine whether 4 months of work amounts to anything. He explained the manual override system. He explained the statistical clustering of denials. He explained the demographic correlation. And then he got to the numbers, the enrollment discrepancy, the $47,000, the 3 semesters of data that told a story no innocent explanation could account for. Dr. Bennett did not interrupt. He listened with the complete focused attention of a man who understood that what he was hearing was going to require him to act, and who was already behind his listening face, beginning to understand the dimensions of what acting was going to mean. Victoria had gone very still. The color that had drained from her face when Dr. Bennett shook Michael's hand had not come back. If anything, it had retreated further. She was sitting in a chair in the president's office, and she was watching an accounting student she had apparently underestimated catastrophically lay out 4 months of documented evidence against her. And she had the particular stillness of someone who has run through the available options and found all of them inadequate. When Daniel finished, the office was silent. Dr. Bennett looked at the phone for a moment longer. Then he looked up. "Victoria," he said, "is there anything you want to say in response to what we've just seen?" Victoria said, "I would need to consult with—" "Is there anything you want to say right now?" Dr. Bennett said, "before I make the calls I'm about to make." A long pause. Victoria looked at Michael, then at Emma, then at Daniel. She said, "I didn't think it would. I didn't think anyone was keeping track." The sentence fell into the silence of the room and stayed there. Nobody repeated it. Nobody needed to. It had the quality of a confession that doesn't know it's a confession, the raw, unfiltered truth of a person who has just said the actual thing instead of the managed version and who cannot take it back. "I didn't think anyone was keeping track. Not I didn't do it. Not there's an explanation. Not you've misread the data. I didn't think anyone was watching." Emma looked at her. She looked at the woman who had thrown her food in the trash and told her to know her place, and looked at her like she was something to be managed rather than a person to be fed. And she felt not the triumph she might have expected to feel, not the rush of vindication she had perhaps been quietly hoping for without admitting it, but something slower and more complicated, something adjacent to sadness. Not for Victoria, for all the Priyas and Sophias and Marcuses who had absorbed Victoria's calculation and adjusted their own lives around it quietly and visibly because they had correctly determined that nobody with enough power was watching. Until today, Dr. Bennett picked up his phone. "Margaret," he said, "I need you to reach the university attorney, the head of financial services, and the board chair. Tell them it's urgent. Tell them I need them in the conference room within the hour." He paused. "And I need you to reach campus compliance." He set the phone down. He looked at Victoria Hayes. "Effective immediately," he said, "you are suspended from your position pending a full administrative and financial investigation. You will not return to Morrison Hall or any other dining facility on this campus. You will make yourself available to investigators, and you will not discuss this matter with any current staff member. His voice was even, completely controlled. The flatness of genuine institutional authority. Do you understand? Victoria said yes. Her voice was barely audible. You can wait in the outer office, Dr. Bennett said. Margaret will arrange for an escort. Victoria stood up. She picked up her purse. She walked toward the door and she stopped with her hand on the frame and she turned around and she looked at Emma. Not at Michael, not at Daniel, not at Dr. Bennett, at Emma specifically. And she said, I'm sorry. Emma looked at her for a long moment. She did not say it's okay, because it wasn't. She did not say I forgive you, because that was not something that happened in the space of a single afternoon in a president's office. She did not perform generosity. She didn't feel, because she had spent enough of her life performing composure, she didn't have, and she was finished performing things. She said, I know. 2 words. Not warm, not cold, just real, just the acknowledgement of a person who has heard something and is not going to pretend it means more than it does at this particular moment. Victoria went through the door. It closed behind her. Dr. Bennett let out a breath that was long enough to suggest he had been holding it for a while. He looked at Michael. He looked at Daniel. He looked at Emma last, and his expression when he looked at her had something in it that went beyond the professional gravity of the moment. Something personal, something that acknowledged without stating it directly, that what Emma had walked into today, by accident, by the simple act of trying to eat lunch after a hard exam, had uncovered something this institution needed to confront. Emma, he said, I want to be direct with you. What happened to you today was wrong, full stop, and what Daniel has shown me today suggests that you were one of many students who experienced something wrong in that dining hall, and that the wrong goes deeper than what any of them knew they were dealing with. He folded his hands on the desk. I cannot fix today. I can't give you back the morning you had or the way it felt to be standing in that cafeteria. But I can tell you that this investigation will be real, it will be thorough, and its results will be public. Emma said, and the students who were affected, the ones who had premium plans and got denied access, who paid for something they never received. Dr. Bennett looked at her steadily. They'll be made whole. Whatever restitution is owed, it will be paid. Emma nodded. Daniel, who had been standing through all of this with the expression of someone processing an experience that has exceeded all expectations, said, Can I ask the $47,000, where do you think it went? Dr. Bennett said, That's what the financial investigation will determine. He looked at Daniel with an expression that was direct and also held a specific weight of institutional accountability. The look of a person who understands that a student was doing the university's job for it for 4 months and who is not unaware of what that means. You built this record at some personal risk. I want you to know that is recognized. Daniel said, I kept thinking someone else was going to see it. Someone in accounting or auditing or someone who was supposed to be looking. You were supposed to be looking, Dr. Bennett. Supposed to be looking, Dr. Bennett said, and you were. The office was quiet for a moment. Then Michael said, There's one more thing. Dr. Bennett looked at him. The students who were affected, Priya, Sophia, the others, Daniel knows about the ones we don't know about yet. I want to make sure what happened to them doesn't become a footnote in a report that gets filed and forgotten. He said it plainly, not aggressively, not as a threat, the way he said most things as a statement of what he intended offered to whoever was in the room, so they could either align with it or not. These are kids who calculated that fighting wasn't worth the cost. They made that calculation correctly based on the information they had. I want them to know the calculation changed. Dr. Bennett said, I'll personally reach out to every student we can identify. Michael nodded. He stood up. Emma stood up. Daniel stood up. And Michael looked at Dr. Bennett one more time and said the thing that had been sitting at the bottom of everything since he walked through the cafeteria doors, the thing that was not about Victoria, not about the money, not about the spreadsheet or the investigation or the administrative suspension. He said, My daughter earned her place here. I need you to know that, not because I wrote any checks, because she has worked harder than most people in this building will ever understand. And she deserved better than what she got today. Dr. Bennett said, She did, and she does. Michael nodded once. Then he turned to Emma, and in a voice that was private, meant only for her, he said, You ready to go get some lunch? Emma laughed. It came out unexpected, the real kind of laugh, the kind that breaks through when you've been holding something heavy, and the sudden release of pressure finds the closest available exit. "Yeah," she said, "I'm starving." They walked out of the president's office, the three of them, a father in a Hells Angels vest, a daughter who had earned every inch of her place, and an accounting student who had spent 4 months watching when everyone else had looked away. The hallway outside was quiet, but downstairs on the other side of campus, the cafeteria was anything but. The video that three different students had recorded was already moving through group chats and social feeds and the fast, invisible infrastructure of campus communication that never slept. By the time Michael and Emma walked back into Morrison Hall 40 minutes later, the room felt different. Not transformed, not fixed, but different in the specific way of a space where something that had been invisible has been named. Students looked at Emma as she walked in. Some of them nodded. One girl, someone Emma had never spoken to, a senior she only recognized from the library, started clapping. Just her at first. Then two other people at her table joined, and then a few more. Not a roar, not a performance, just the quiet, genuine sound of a room acknowledging something it had just understood. Emma did not know what to do with that. She looked at her father. Michael was looking at the room with an expression she recognized, the one he got when something confirmed something he had always believed. Not surprise, something closer to relief. He put his arm around her shoulders again. She walked to the counter, and this time she picked up a tray. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected. That was the first thing Emma noticed. In her experience, and in the experience of every scholarship student she knew who had ever tried to push back against something institutional, these things moved slowly, deliberately slowly, as if the pace itself was a message, as if the grinding of administrative gears was designed to exhaust the people making noise until they decided the noise wasn't worth it. But this one moved fast. By Monday morning, 72 hours after Michael Carter walked into Morrison Hall in his Hells Angels vest and asked a single question, three separate investigative processes had been formally initiated. The university's internal compliance office, the external financial auditors that Dr. Bennett had retained over the weekend, pulling in a firm from San Francisco that specialized in institutional fraud, and quietly but unmistakably a preliminary inquiry from the state attorney general's office, triggered by a formal complaint that had been filed Saturday afternoon. Emma found out about the attorney general inquiry from Daniel, who texted her Sunday night at 11:40 with a message that read simply AG office. Look at the university news page. This just went somewhere much bigger than Morrison Hall. She sat up in her dorm bed and pulled up the page on her laptop. The statement was brief and carefully worded, the kind of language that says a great deal by choosing each word with surgical precision. It confirmed that the university had self-reported potential financial irregularities to state authorities and was cooperating fully with any resulting inquiry. It confirmed that a member of dining services management had been suspended pending investigation. It made no mention of Victoria Hayes by name. It made no mention of $47,000. But it was there. Official, public, permanent. Emma read it twice. Then she set her laptop on the bed beside her and sat in the dark for a while, thinking about something Daniel had said. I didn't start doing this because I thought I'd find anything. She understood that now in a way she hadn't fully understood it when he said it. Because that was the thing about evidence. You didn't always know you were collecting it. Sometimes you were just a person who noticed when numbers didn't add up, and you kept a record because keeping records was what your mind naturally did. And then one day a man walked through a cafeteria door in a leather vest, and everything you'd been quietly holding suddenly had somewhere to go. She texted Daniel back, "You knew this was bigger. You knew from the beginning." His reply came 3 minutes later. "I knew, I just didn't know if it mattered." Turns out it mattered. She set the phone down. It mattered. 2 words. But they carried the specific weight of 4 months in a yellow spreadsheet and 11 premium meal plan denials that the system had recorded and no one had been supposed to find. Monday arrived and Emma went to class. She went to the library for her evening shift. She shelved books in the 300s and the 400s and sat behind the checkout desk during the slow hour between 8 and 9 and tried to feel normal, which was difficult because normal had shifted slightly over the weekend, the way normal does after something significant. The same furniture, in the same room, but the light hitting it at a different angle. Students kept coming up to her, not in a crowd, one at a time throughout the day, the way people approach when they want to say something but aren't sure of their welcome. A girl in her economics seminar who had never spoken to her directly said, "I heard what happened. I just wanted to say I saw her do something similar to my roommate last semester." I didn't know it was happening to that many people. A guy from the library who Emma had worked alongside for 8 months said, "My cousin went here 2 years ago. He dropped out of the premium plan after one semester. We always thought it was something with his card." A sophomore Emma had never met stopped her between buildings and said simply, "Thank you," and walked away before Emma could respond. Each one landed differently. Each one added weight to the thing Emma was still figuring out how to carry. She called her father Monday evening. He picked up on the second ring the way he always did, as if he kept the phone close when he knew she might call. She heard the familiar background sounds of his shop, the distant sound of something metal against metal, the hum of the garage ventilation system, the particular acoustic quality of a large space with concrete floors. "How you doing?" he said. "Weird," Emma said. "Good weird, but weird." "That tracks," he said. "People keep thanking me," she said. "I don't know what to do with that. I didn't do anything. You walked through the door. Daniel had the spreadsheet. I was trying to eat lunch." "Em," her father said. "What?" "You stood at that counter and you didn't fold," he said. "You didn't apologize. You didn't shrink. When she told you to know your place, you didn't move." He paused. "That's not nothing. That's actually the whole thing." Emma was quiet. "You were the one who was there," Michael said. "I just showed up." She didn't argue with him. Not because she agreed entirely. She knew what he'd done, what he'd risked, the weight his presence had carried in that room, in a way hers couldn't, not alone, but because she understood what he was doing. He was giving her the story back, her version of it. The version where she was not the rescued, but the person who held the line until the cavalry arrived. She was not sure she'd fully earned that version, but she was going to think about it. "The Attorney General's office," she said. "Did you know that was going to happen?" "I made a phone call Saturday morning," Michael said, "to someone I know who works in financial oversight, sent him Daniel's spreadsheet, told him what we'd found. He made some calls of his own." "You have a friend in the Attorney General's office," Emma said. "I have a friend who knows people," Michael said. "I've been in business for 15 years. You meet people." "Dad," Emma said, and there was something that was almost laughter in her voice, the dark kind, the kind that comes when something is too real to take straight. "Who are you?" he laughed. The real one, low and quiet. "I'm your father," he said. "That's who I am. Everything else is just details." The investigation results came in waves. The first wave arrived Wednesday, 9 days after the incident, when the financial auditors completed their preliminary review of the dining services accounts. Emma heard about it from Daniel, who had been asked formally, officially, with a letter from the compliance office, to provide his records as supporting documentation for the audit. He had sat in a room with 2 auditors and a compliance attorney for 3 hours while they went through his spreadsheet line by line. He called Emma when he came out. "61,000, he said. His voice was strange, flat in the way that voices go flat when a number is too large to process emotionally. 61,000, Emma said. "You said 47. "I was off by 20%, Daniel said. "Like I told your father I might be, except I was off in the wrong direction. The actual discrepancy is $61,240. Across 4 semesters, not 3. They found an earlier semester I didn't have full access to." Emma sat down. $61,000, she said. "Yeah, from students who paid for a premium plan and got denied access." "Yes, but that's not the part that—" Daniel stopped. She heard him take a breath. "Emma, the auditors found something in the accounts that I didn't find, because I didn't have access to the level of records they have." She waited. "The money wasn't just sitting somewhere," Daniel said. "It was being moved, transferred out of the dining services operational fund in amounts small enough to avoid automatic flagging. 20 here, 30 there. Over 4 semesters, and it was being transferred to the auditors found a vendor account, a catering vendor that the university had a service contract with." He paused again. "The vendor doesn't exist. The address on the contract goes to an empty office suite in Burbank that's been vacant for 2 years. The business license was registered 18 months ago under a name that, when you dig 2 layers down, connects back to Home." "Victoria," Emma said. "To a relative," Daniel said. "A brother-in-law. His name is on the business registration, but the auditors think Victoria was the architect." He let out a long breath. Emma, this wasn't impulsive. This wasn't someone skimming a little here and there and hoping no one noticed. This was a constructed scheme. She built a fake vendor. She manipulated the enrollment reporting to create a cash surplus. And she channeled it out through a contract that looked legitimate on the surface. Emma was holding her phone so tightly her hand had started to ache. She targeted scholarship students specifically, Emma said, because she knew they were less likely to fight it, less likely to have someone who could push back. That's what the compliance officer said this morning, Daniel said quietly. She chose them because she calculated they were safe to exploit. The word landed like something physical, safe to exploit. Emma thought about Priya eating in the East Dining Hall with the buzzing lights, calculating the cost of fighting and deciding she couldn't afford it. Victoria had made that calculation too from the other side. She had looked at these students and she had seen not people but a risk assessment. Low risk, high yield, exploit accordingly. Emma felt something harden in her chest, not anger, something past anger, something that had the specific temperature of a decision being made. Daniel, she said, yeah. How many students total that we can identify? The auditors are still going through records, he said. But preliminary count, they're looking at somewhere between 80 and 100 students across the 4 semesters. Students who paid the premium upgrade and had their access manipulated. 80 to 100 students. Emma sat with that for a long moment. Then she said, I need to make some calls. The second wave arrived the following week, and it came from a direction nobody had anticipated. The videos had been circulating since the Friday afternoon of the incident. 3 different angles posted by 3 different students, spreading through social media with the particular velocity that certain videos achieve when they capture something people recognize without being able to immediately articulate. Not viral in the explosive overnight sense, but steady, persistent, the kind of spread that happens when something resonates with a specific community deeply enough that they keep passing it along because they need other people to see it. The Westbridge scholarship student community was not large, but it was connected the way communities are connected when they share the specific particular experience of being in a place that wasn't entirely built for them. Emma had been part of that community for 3 years without fully understanding that it was a community she had known. Individuals had spoken to people in passing, had exchanged the particular solidarity of knowing glances in expensive spaces, but had not understood until now how many of those individuals had been carrying similar weights. They started finding each other. The videos were the catalyst. Students who had experienced something in Morrison Hall, who had been turned away, who had been told their card didn't scan, who had absorbed the particular quality of Victoria Hayes's management style and filed it away as personal bad luck, began to reach out to each other, to Daniel, whose name had gotten out as the person who had kept records, to Emma, whose situation had been the one that happened to be visible. A group text started, then a group chat with a name someone had created, Morrison Truth. Within 4 days, it had 47 members. Emma read through the messages that had accumulated when she first joined. They went back to that first weekend individual accounts posted in the hesitant testing way of people who were not sure they would be believed, not sure their experience was real enough to count, not sure after months or years of absorbing the message that their situation was their own problem to men, whether speaking it out loud in a group of other people would feel like relief or exposure. A girl named Jasmine wrote, I thought it was just me. I thought I was doing something wrong. I kept double-checking my payment records every time it happened. A guy named Terrell wrote, she told me my card had a system error 4 times, 4 separate days. Same card, same plan. I started bringing printed copies of my receipt after the second time. She still found a reason. Sophia, the girl who had dropped her premium plan, wrote, I feel stupid for not fighting harder. I keep thinking about the money my family spent on that upgrade. We talked about it for weeks before they agreed it was worth it. Emma read that one and had to set her phone down. Sophia's family had talked about it for weeks, the way Emma and her father had talked about things for weeks. The specific, careful arithmetic of a family that doesn't have room for mistakes, working through whether a $300 upgrade was an investment or an indulgence, deciding it was worth it because nutrition matters and brain function matters, and their kid deserved a proper meal while she was carrying a full course load and working to maintain her scholarship. And then Victoria Hayes had made a different calculation about Sophia's family. A colder one. A crueler one. Emma typed into the group chat, "None of you did anything wrong. None of you should have had to fight harder. The burden was never supposed to be on you to prove you belonged." That's what we're going to make sure gets said clearly in whatever comes next. She pressed send. The response came in immediately. Dozens of replies in the space of 2 minutes. Short ones. Single sentences. But the texture of them was unmistakable. The texture of people who had been holding something alone and had just been given permission to set it down. The third wave was the one that went public. 2 weeks after the initial incident, the university issued a formal statement. Not the careful, lawyerly language of the first one. A real statement. Dr. Bennett had drafted it himself. Emma was told later, and had gone through 7 revisions before settling on language that he felt was honest rather than managed. The statement acknowledged that a systematic pattern of discriminatory access denial had occurred in Morrison Hall dining over a period of 4 semesters. It acknowledged that the pattern had disproportionately affected scholarship students and students from low-income backgrounds. It acknowledged that a financial fraud scheme had been uncovered in connection with the same period. It announced that Victoria Hayes had been formally terminated and that criminal charges had been referred to the district attorney's office. It announced that all affected students would be identified, contacted individually, and offered full financial restitution for their premium plan payments, plus additional compensation for documented denial of access. And then it said something that Emma had not expected. It announced the creation of the Carter Brooks Student Advocacy Fund, named with the agreement of both Michael Carter and Daniel Brooks after the 2 people whose actions had brought the pattern to light. The fund, seeded with a significant contribution from the Westbridge Scholarship Endowment, would provide independent advocacy services for scholarship students experiencing institutional discrimination, with an ombudsperson reporting directly to the board rather than to university administration. "Dad," Emma said, "there's going to be an advocate, someone students can go to who isn't part of the administration." "I know," he said. Do you understand what that means? For students like me, for the ones who were calculating the cost of fighting and deciding it was too high. They'll have somewhere to go now, someone who is specifically on their side." "I know, Em." "You asked for that," she said. "You asked Bennett for that in the office. I heard you. You said you wanted the calculation to change for them." "I said I wanted them to know the calculation changed," Michael said. "There's a difference, and they already did the hard part. They showed up. They kept paying for plans that were being manipulated. They kept trying to eat their lunch in that room. I wanted them to have a door." Emma pressed her hand against the edge of the checkout desk and looked at the ceiling of the library and tried to find the words for what she was feeling. She couldn't find them. Some things don't resolve into language cleanly. They stay in the body instead, in the pressure behind the eyes, in the tightness across the chest, in the specific ache of understanding something about a person you love that you had not fully understood before. "You funded 11 scholarships," she said, "for 6 years, quietly." He said, "and you never told me." "No, because you didn't want to take away my sense of having done it myself." "That's part of it," he said. "What's the other part?" she asked. I was quiet for a moment. The shop sounds came through the phone, the hum, the distant metal, the concrete acoustic. Then he said, "When your mother died, you were 8 years old, and you made a decision that I watched you make, even though you didn't know I was watching. You decided you were going to be okay. Not that you weren't going to hurt, not that it wasn't going to be hard, but that you were going to be okay. You just made that decision. 8 years old." His voice was steady but careful the way it got when he was talking about something he kept behind a door most of the time. "I watched you make that decision, and I thought the best thing I can do for this kid is make sure the world has room for her. Not clear the path, just make room." He paused. "These scholarships made room. For you and for other kids like you who were going to show up and make that decision and deserved a place to land when they did." Emma couldn't speak for a moment. "You made room," she said finally. "I tried to," he said. The fourth wave was Victoria Hayes. The criminal referral had moved to the district attorney's office, and the DA had moved on it with a speed that it suggested the political and institutional pressure from the Attorney General's inquiry had concentrated attention in useful ways. The charges were fraud, misappropriation of funds, and breach of fiduciary duty. $61,240, 83 confirmed victims. 4 semesters of deliberate, systematic exploitation. Victoria appeared at an arraignment on a Thursday morning. Emma did not go. She had class. She also made a conscious decision that her presence at the courthouse was not something she needed, that the legal process was its own thing, running on its own tracks, and that her relationship to what had happened did not depend on watching Victoria stand before a judge. Daniel texted her from outside the courthouse. She pled not guilty. Her attorney says they were going to challenge the financial evidence. Then 30 seconds later, the Attorney General's office has a forensic accountant who spent 2 weeks on this. I feel okay about the financial evidence. Emma replied, how did she look? A pause, then smaller. She put the phone in her bag and went to class. The fifth wave was the one that surprised her most. 3 weeks after the incident, a Thursday afternoon, Emma was walking across the quad when she saw Priya. Priya Sharma, who had told Emma in the library stacks about being turned away from Morrison Hall twice in 1 week, who had stopped trying, who had eaten in the East Dining Hall with the buzzing lights for an entire semester, recalculating her day around the assumption that Morrison Hall was not for her. Priya was sitting on a bench outside the science building with a to-go container from Morrison Hall's lunch service. She looked up when Emma approached. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then Priya said, I started going back last week. How was it? Emma said. Weird, and Priya said, good weird. She looked down at the container. The pasta is actually really good. I forgot it was good. I spent a whole semester eating the East Side sandwiches, and I forgot this place has real food. Emma sat down next to her. Are you okay? She said. Really? Priya was quiet for a second. Then she said, I'm angry. I thought I was past it, but I'm angry. Not at you, not even really at her anymore. Just at the whole idea that I sat there for a semester and just absorbed it. That I told myself it wasn't worth fighting. That I was smarter than other people who wasted energy on things like this. She shook her head. I wasn't smarter. I was just tired. And I convinced myself that being tired was pragmatism. It was survival, Emma said. It was, Priya said. And I'm tired of surviving, being the bar. Emma looked at her. Then raise the bar, Emma said. Priya laughed the real kind, short and surprised. Just like that. Not just like that, Emma said. It's hard, but there's an advocate now, there's a fund, there are actual structures being built, so the next person who's standing where you were standing has somewhere to go. That's real. It's not everything, but it's real. Priya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, your dad, the videos, I watched the video like 6 times, the part where he just stands there and asks her to explain herself, and he doesn't yell, he doesn't do anything dramatic, he just stands there and holds the ground. That's him, Emma said. That's always been him. My dad drives a taxi, Priya said. He works 12-hour shifts. He saved for 2 years to pay my first semester. And when I told him what happened with the meal plan, he blamed himself. He said maybe he should have gotten me the basic plan to start that. Maybe I was asking too much of the premium dining. Her voice tightened. He blamed himself because that's what we do. We absorb it and then we aim it inward. Emma felt that hit her somewhere specific. Tell him it wasn't his fault, Emma said. Tell him he gave you exactly what he said he would. The person who failed you wasn't him. Priya pressed her lips together, nodded. Then she said, the restitution letter came yesterday from the university. They're paying back everything. Good, Emma said. It's $312, Priya said. 1 semester upgrade fee, and I know that's the amount. I know it's just the number. She looked at the pasta container. But it was also my dad worked a Tuesday and Wednesday to cover that upgrade. He tracked his shifts by what they were paying for. Tuesday, I drive for Emma's books. Wednesday, I drive for the meal upgrade. He used to text me that. She swallowed. Getting the money back means I can tell him Tuesday and Wednesday weren't wasted. Emma sat beside her on the bench in the afternoon and felt the specific, irreducible realness of $312. Not as an abstract amount in an audit report, not as a line in a $61,000 fraud scheme, as 2 days of 12-hour shifts, as a father tracking his work against his daughter's needs, as a Tuesday and a Wednesday that now had not been taken for nothing. She thought about her own father, 400 miles south hands, smelling of engine grease, setting aside money in the careful increments of a life where every dollar was accounted for. Not just for Emma, for 11 other students he would never meet, for the room he was trying to make. She thought about what he had said. The best thing I can do for this kid is make sure the world has room for her. She thought he didn't just make room for her. He had been making room for all of them. And he had done it so quietly for so long in a leather vest that made people look at him and decided they already knew his story, that it had taken one arrogant cafeteria manager and one impossible afternoon for any of it to come to the surface. She sat with Priya until the girl finished her pasta. And when Priya stood up to go, she stopped and looked at Emma and said the thing that Emma had been hearing from people all week. But that landed differently this time, coming from Priya, coming from someone who understood the specific arithmetic of it. "I'm glad your dad showed up," she said. Emma looked at her. "So am I," she said. The investigation began the same afternoon. Not the slow procedural kind that universities sometimes launch when they want to appear responsive without actually moving, the kind that generates committee meetings and working groups and preliminary assessments that take 3 months to produce a document recommending further review. This one moved fast because the evidence Daniel Brooks had compiled was not ambiguous. It was not circumstantial. It was 4 months of precise cross-referenced accounting data built by a 20-year-old on a free spreadsheet app. And it was more organized and more damning than anything the university's own internal audit team would have produced if they'd been looking, which, as it turned out, they had not been. The university attorney arrived at Bennett's office within 40 minutes of the call. The head of financial services arrived 12 minutes after that. The board chair, a woman named Eleanor Voss, who had built a career in corporate law before transitioning to nonprofit governance, was on a video call from her home office within the hour. And when she looked at Daniel's spreadsheet, shared screen from Dr. Bennett's laptop, she was quiet for a very long time before she said anything at all. What she said was, "How long has this student had this information?" Dr. Bennett said, 4 months. Eleanor Voss said, "And our compliance office had none of it." The silence that followed that question was the specific silence of institutional accountability, the kind that doesn't have a comfortable answer and doesn't pretend to. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the university had engaged an external forensic accounting firm. By 4, campus security had secured the dining services administrative office, and 2 servers who worked directly under Victoria's supervision had been asked to come in for interviews, voluntary at this stage, but with the clear understanding that the situation was serious and that cooperation was in everyone's interest. By 5, the story had left campus entirely. It started the way these things always start. Now, not with a press release, not with a journalist making calls, but with a 17-second video clip. The one that showed Victoria Hayes dropping Emma's food tray into the trash. 11 seconds of footage, slightly shaky shot from the table angle, by a freshman named Jessie Park, who had the presence of mind to start recording the moment she sensed something wrong, and who had posted it to her social media with 3 words of caption, "This happened today." By the time Michael and Emma were eating lunch in Morrison Hall, the clip had been viewed 40,000 times. By the time they walked back to Emma's dormitory at 6 in the evening, it was approaching 300,000. Michael did not have social media. He was aware of it the way a person can be aware of weather systems in other states as a real thing that affects the world, just not a thing he participated in directly. Emma showed him the numbers on her phone while they sat in the small common room on her dormitory floor, and he looked at the screen with the expression of a man who is processing something that exists slightly outside his native framework. 300,000 people watched that, he said. "That's just this one account," Emma said. "It's been reposted at least a dozen times that I can find." Michael handed the phone back. He rubbed his face with both hands, the gesture he made when something was too large to hold comfortably in his mind and all at once. "Huh, Dad, yeah. Are you okay?" He looked at her. "Are you..." Emma thought about it honestly, the way she had learned to think about things from him, not performing an answer, not reaching for the one that sounded right, but actually checking, actually looking at what was inside and reporting accurately. "I don't know yet," she said. "I think I'm still somewhere in the middle of it." "That's honest," he said. "You taught me that." I was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The video. People are going to want to talk about it. Reporters maybe, people from the university. You don't have to talk to anyone you don't want to." "I know. But if you do want to..." "I'll be fine," Emma said. "I've been handling things on my own for 3 years." The words came out with a slight edge she hadn't entirely intended. Not sharp, not directed at him as a wound, but carrying the specific weight of truth that sometimes has an edge simply because it's true. Michael received it. He didn't deflect it or argue with it. He sat with it the way he sat with most uncomfortable things, squarely without flinching, giving it the full weight of his attention. I know you have, he said. That was never supposed to mean I wasn't available. I know that too, Emma said. 400 miles and you never missed a Tuesday. Michael nodded. Sometimes I think I got so good at not needing help that I forgot I was allowed to ask for it. The common room was empty around them. Someone had left a half-eaten bag of chips on the coffee table. The fluorescent light in the corner buzzed faintly at a frequency that you stopped noticing after about a minute. Outside the window, the campus was moving into its evening rhythms, students crossing the quad, in the lowering light voices carrying the loosened quality of people transitioning from the day's obligations into the night's possibilities. Michael said, "You can always ask, that never expires." Emma looked at him, then she said, "Did you know when you upgraded the meal plan? Did you know what was happening in that cafeteria?" He shook his head. "No, I knew you needed real food, that was all. But you knew there were problems with scholarship students. I knew the scholarship program existed for a reason," he said, "and that the reason wasn't just financial. There are a lot of ways a school can make someone feel like they don't belong without technically doing anything wrong. I've seen it my whole life." He paused. "But no, I didn't know about Victoria Hayes specifically. I didn't know about the money." Emma said $47,000. "Yeah, that's more than I'll earn in my first year after graduation." "Probably," Michael said. "She just took it from students like me, students who were already stretched thin, and then made us feel like we were the ones who didn't belong." Michael said, "The worst part isn't the money." "I know," Emma said. "The worst part is Sophia dropping her meal plan because the friction of fighting was too expensive. The worst part is that it worked. For 2.5 years it worked because the people it was happening to didn't have enough power to stop it." She said it clearly, without the wobble of self-pity, with the flat, precise anger of someone who has fully understood something and is holding the understanding steady. Michael nodded. "And now," he said, "now Daniel's spreadsheet is on the desk of a forensic accounting team," Emma said, "and the video has 300,000 views, and Victoria Hayes is suspended." She took a breath. So now the calculation changed. They sat together in the buzzing quiet of the common room, and outside the window, the campus moved into evening, and neither of them said anything for a while, and that was fine. Some silences between people who love each other aren't empty. They're just rest. The next morning came with its own velocity. Emma's phone started going at 6:47, which meant before her alarm, which meant before her shower, which meant before she had the basic human scaffolding of caffeine and quiet to process anything. She reached for it in the dark and looked at the screen and saw 17 missed calls, 42 texts, and a news notification that made her sit up straight. Westbridge cafeteria manager suspended amid fraud investigation. Viral video sparks campus outcry. The story had been picked up overnight by a regional news outlet, and then by 2 national education journalism sites, and then while Emma was still reading by a wire service, whose report would land in the feeds of 47 affiliated newspapers by 9 o'clock that morning. The 17-second video was now embedded in articles. The words "Hell's Angel Father" appeared in 5 different headlines, each one slightly more dramatic than the last. Emma stared at her phone. Then she called her father, who was staying at a motel 12 minutes from campus. He picked up on the second ring. "You've seen it," she said. "Margaret from Bennett's office called me at 6:30, he said. "Apparently the board chair wants a statement from the university by noon, and there are 2 news vans outside the administration building." "Dad?" "Yeah. There are 17 missed calls on my phone. Don't answer any of them yet," he said immediately. "Not until we know what the university is putting out. You don't want to say something that contradicts the official statement before we know what the official statement says." "When did you get good at media strategy?" "I've been in a business that deals with public perception for 20 years, he said. "You learn." Emma pulled her knees up to her chest on the narrow dormitory bed. She looked at the window. Outside, she could hear the campus beginning its morning sounds. Footsteps on pavement, a distant conversation, a bicycle. "How are you feeling?" she asked him. He was quiet for a moment. "Honest answer. Always." "Tired," he said. "I feel tired, not in a bad way. just like something that was held tight for a long time let go, and now I'm aware of how much energy it took to hold it. Emma understood that. She felt it too in her own version, the particular exhaustion that comes after sustained tension releases, when your body finally sends the bill for all the adrenaline it charged to next month. "What time are you coming?" she asked. "I'll be there by 8, he said. "Don't go anywhere without me today, okay?" "Okay," she said, and she meant it not because she needed protecting, but because she wanted him there. There was a difference, and she understood it now in a way she hadn't quite understood it the day before. She got up, she showered, she dressed, and when she opened her dormitory room door, Priya was standing in the hallway. Priya Mehta was 20, a chemistry sophomore with dark hair and the careful, watchful expression of someone who had learned to be careful and watchful in spaces that rewarded it. She lived 2 doors down from Emma, and they had been on friendly terms without quite being friends, the kind of relationship that exists in dormitory hallways and consists mainly of small kindnesses, in occasional borrowed supplies, in the shared acknowledgement of occupying the same difficult space. She was standing in the hallway in her pajamas, holding her phone, and her eyes were red, and when Emma opened the door, she said, "I saw the video." Emma said, "I know." "She did it to me twice," Priya said. "I told you about it in the library." "I remember." "I thought I was—" She stopped, started again. "I thought I was just being sensitive, that maybe I was reading it wrong, that maybe it really was a system error." "It wasn't a system error," Emma said. "I know that now." Priya's voice had a complicated quality, relief and anger braided together in a way that made it difficult to tell which was louder. "The accounting guy, Daniel, the spreadsheet, it was real. What I experienced was real." "It was real," Emma said. "All of it." Priya pressed her lips together. She looked at the phone in her hand. Then she said, "Is there a way I can talk to someone about what happened to me officially?" Emma said yes. "Dr. Bennett said the university will be reaching out to affected students. But if you want to be proactive, yes, I'll find out who the right contact is." Priya nodded. She looked slightly steadier. Not okay. She was not okay, not yet. That was going to take longer than one morning, but steadier. The specific steadiness of someone who has just had their private experience confirmed as real by the external world, which is its own kind of support. "Thank you," Priya said. "Don't thank me," Emma said. "Thank Daniel. He kept the records." "I'll thank both of you," Priya said. And she almost smiled. Almost. By the time Michael arrived at 8, 3 more students had knocked on Emma's door. All of them scholarship students. All of them with their own version of the same story. All of them carrying the same complicated mixture of validation and anger, and the particular exhaustion of having quietly absorbed something wrong for a long time. Emma stood in her doorway and she listened to every single one of them. She did not rush them. She did not minimize. She asked questions and she took names, and by the time Michael knocked, she had a list of 9 additional students who wanted to formally report their experiences to the university. Michael looked at the list. 9, he said. 9 that came to me this morning, Emma said. Daniel thinks there are more who won't come forward voluntarily. Michael said, "Has Bennett's office been in touch?" Margaret called at 7:15. "The university is releasing a statement at 10. Bennett wants to meet with us at 9:30 before it goes out." "Okay," Michael said. He looked at Emma steadily. "How are you doing?" Answer. "I'm angry," she said. "But it's the good kind of angry. The kind that makes you want to do something, not just feel something." He nodded. "That's the right kind." The 9:30 meeting in Dr. Bennett's office had a different quality from the one the afternoon before. The crisis response energy was still present, but it had organized itself, moved from the jagged, unpredictable shape of a situation just breaking open into the more structured shape of a situation being actively managed. Eleanor Voss, the board chair, was in the room this time in person, having driven from her home 3 hours away at 6 in the morning. She had the assembled gravity of someone who had handled institutional crises before and understood what the next 72 hours required. She looked at Michael when he walked in, and she said, "Mr. Carter, I want to start by saying that this institution owes you and your daughter an apology that goes beyond what happened in that cafeteria yesterday. What we've uncovered suggests a systemic failure that predates this incident by years. That failure belongs to us, not to you." Michael said, "I appreciate that, but the apology I care about is the one that goes to the students who didn't have anyone walk through the door for them." Eleanor Voss held his gaze. Understood, that's what this meeting is about. The statement the university released at 10 o'clock was direct in a way that institutional statements rarely are. It confirmed the suspension. It confirmed the investigation. It confirmed that external forensic accountants had been engaged and that findings would be made public. It acknowledged in language that legal counsel had apparently approved, but that carried the unmistakable weight of Eleanor Voss's particular clarity of expression that scholarship students at Westbridge had experienced unacceptable treatment, that the university took full responsibility for failing to prevent or detect. It also announced in the final paragraph the creation of an emergency student support fund of $200,000 to be administered independently for the direct benefit of any student who could demonstrate that they had been financially or academically harmed by the failures in dining services. Emma read the statement on her phone standing outside the administration building. She read it twice. Then she said $200,000. Michael said, Eleanor Voss has a reputation for doing things properly when she decides to do them. Where does that money come from? Discretionary board funds, he said. And he paused. Emma looked at him. And I matched it, he said. 200 from the board, 200 from the company. The fund starts at 400,000. Emma stared at him. Dad, it's the right thing to do. $400,000. The company's had a good year. Dad. Her voice had broken open slightly, not falling apart, but opened the way a door opens when the person on the other side finally turns the right handle. You can't keep doing this. Doing what? Showing up and fixing things and not telling anyone. I told you, he said. You know. I know because Eleanor Voss told me in a meeting. I didn't know because you told me. Michael was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'm not trying to be mysterious about it. It's just the doing of it is the part that matters. Talking about it feels like something else. What does it feel like? I thought about it genuinely. She could see him actually considering the question, not reaching for a quick answer. It feels like taking credit for something that isn't really about me, he said finally. Those students earned their places here. They were working hard in difficult circumstances. All I did was make sure the infrastructure didn't fail them the way it was failing them. That's just what you do for people who are working that hard. You shore up the ground under them. Emma looked at her father. She looked at the man in the leather vest and the heavy boots in the Hells Angels patch, standing outside a university administration building on a Friday morning, explaining why he'd quietly put $400,000 into a student support fund with the same matter-of-fact tone he used to explain why he'd rotated her tires before she drove back to campus at the start of each semester. She had spent 3 years at this university building herself, building the version of herself that didn't need to lean on anyone, that could take the hits and keep moving, that could absorb a Victoria Hayes at the cafeteria counter and walk away with her dignity intact. She had been proud of that. She was still proud of it, but she understood now, standing outside in the morning air with 9 students' names in her phone and $400,000 going into a fund that would help people like her, that there were different kinds of strength and they were not in competition with each other. Her strength and her father's strength were not the same thing. They were complementary, like load-bearing walls in different parts of the same building. She put her arms around him. He held on. The news vans were still there. She could see them in her peripheral vision. She knew that within the next few hours, the university's statement would generate follow-up questions, and those questions would come looking for faces and voices to attach the story to, and some of those faces and voices were probably going to be hers, whether she sought it or not. She knew Daniel was somewhere on campus being asked by his accounting professor how his research project was going and having absolutely no idea how to answer that. She knew Priya was sitting in her dormitory room, drafting a formal account of her experiences to submit to the investigation team. She knew Victoria Hayes was somewhere, a home, a lawyer's office, some room that felt entirely different now than it had 48 hours ago, sitting with the weight of what she'd done and what it had cost and what it was going to cost further. She knew all of this was still in motion, still unsettled, still working its way toward whatever shape it was going to take when it came to rest. But right now, in this moment, she was standing outside an administration building with her father's arms around her, and the morning was bright, and somewhere inside the university, a fund with $400,000 in it was about to start changing the calculations that scholarship students at Westbridge had been making quietly and alone for years. The investigation, meanwhile, was moving faster than anyone expected. The forensic accounting firm had been given full access to dining services records by noon on Friday. By Saturday morning, they had identified the mechanism. Victoria Hayes had been running a straightforward but effective skimming operation, manually approving premium tier access for certain students while logging them in the system as standard tier users, then redirecting the billing difference into a secondary account she had established using a variation of the dining services vendor payment structure. Simple enough that it had gone undetected through 2 internal audit cycles. Sophisticated enough to have generated $47,312 over 17 months. When Daniel heard the confirmed number, he was sitting in the library with Emma, and he said, "I was off by $312. Emma looked at him. "I said 47,000 give or take," he said. "The actual number is 47,312. I was off by less than 1%. Emma said, "Daniel, yeah, you should be very proud of yourself." He looked at the table for a moment. He had the expression of someone who is not entirely sure how to receive that, who has spent 4 months in the solitary, largely invisible work of keeping records in a folder on his phone, and is now sitting across from a moment that is asking him to understand that the work mattered, that it counted, that it had weight in the real world beyond the satisfaction of the numbers aligning. "I just did the math," he said. "You did the math when nobody else was doing it," Emma said, "for people who needed someone to do it. That's not a small thing." Daniel nodded, once, the nod of someone accepting something they're not going to argue with, but aren't entirely comfortable holding yet. He'd get there. Emma was sure of it. People who do the right thing quietly without an audience usually need a little time to adjust to having an audience. The university's Saturday update confirmed the forensic findings and announced that the matter had been referred to the district attorney's office. Fraud charges. The specific confirmed number of $47,312 appeared in the press release, and when it appeared in the news covers that followed, it generated its own reaction. Because $47,000 is a number that means different things to different people. To a cafeteria manager running a skimming operation, it was apparently the answer to something. To a scholarship student paying $312 extra per semester for premium dining access, it was 152 semesters of meal plan upgrades. To a university board chair reviewing the numbers at 6 in the morning, it was a failure of institutional oversight that was going to generate consequences for more people than just Victoria Hayes. And to the internet, which had already been watching since the 17-second video, it was the piece that made the story complete. Not just an arrogant manager, not just a confrontation, a pattern, a system, a choice made over 17 months to take from the people who had the least and could least afford to fight back. The comments came in waves. Emma stopped reading them after the first 1,000 or so, not because they were hostile, but because the sheer volume of them had a disorienting quality. The feeling of having your private experience suddenly inhabit a public space where strangers were processing it at a volume and velocity you had no control over. Some of the comments were angry, some were supportive, some were people sharing their own versions of the same story from different schools, different cities, different industries. The experience of being in a space that communicated you didn't belong before anyone said a word. Some were people who had looked up Michael Carter's company and were expressing surprise at its size and successes, though the surprise itself revealed something about the assumptions they'd arrived with. Michael read none of it. He drove home to Riverside on Saturday afternoon because he had a shop to run and employees who needed their paychecks processed by Monday, and a life that existed in the real world rather than the reactive, amplified space of news cycles. Before he left, he sat with Emma in the common room one more time. He said, "You know what happens next is going to be complicated." "I know," she said. "Reporters, university politics, the investigation timeline. All of it takes longer than one weekend. I know. You've got your seminar on Monday and your library shift on Tuesday. Don't let any of this become a reason to fall behind." "Behind," Emma said. "Dad, I have a 3.87 GPA. "I know," he said. "I'm just being my dad," she said. He smiled. The specific smile she had been seeing her whole life, the one that started in the corner of his mouth and never quite made it all the way to a full expression, like it was always a little embarrassed about itself. Yeah, he said, being your dad. She walked him to this parking lot. His truck sat where he'd left it, the battered blue pickup that had driven 400 miles on Friday morning, because he had an afternoon free and a daughter he hadn't seen since September, and a feeling the kind that you can't explain, but that you learn to listen to, that he should be there. He got in, he started the engine, he rolled down the window. Tuesday, he said. She said, I'll be here. He drove. Emma stood in the parking lot and watched the truck until it turned the corner and was gone. And she thought about what he had said, that she was going there to build something that didn't exist yet. She had thought he meant a career, a future, the conventional architecture of a better life. But standing here now with 9 students' names in her phone and a university investigation underway, and a $400,000 fund that hadn't existed 72 hours ago, she understood that he had meant something larger than that, something that wasn't only about her. You don't just build for yourself. You build for the people who will come after you and use what you made without ever knowing your name. She went back inside. She had work to do. 3 weeks passed. They passed the way consequential weeks always pass quickly in some places and slowly in others, fast in the forward motion of events and slow in the private interior processing that runs underneath events like a current beneath moving water. The investigation continued. The forensic accounting team submitted a preliminary report. The district attorney's office confirmed it had received the referral. Campus legal counsel issued a series of statements that said less and less as the legal process required more and more discretion, which was frustrating to the students watching, but Emma was told by someone in the university communications office, simply how these things worked. Victoria Hayes retained a lawyer. The lawyer issued a statement saying his client denied any intentional wrongdoing and was cooperating fully with investigators. The statement was 3 sentences long and generated a brief flare of online reaction before the news cycle moved on to other things, as it always does. What did not move on was the campus itself. Something had changed at Westbridge University. Not everything, not overnight, not in the clean, complete way that stories sometimes describe, changed the before and after the clear line between what was and what is. Real change doesn't work like that. Real change is slower and messier and requires people to do the unglamorous, repetitive work of showing up differently in the same spaces they've always occupied. But something had changed. Emma felt it in small ways first. In the cafeteria where the servers made eye contact now, in a way they hadn't before, not performing warmth, just extending the basic human acknowledgement that had previously been selectively withheld. In the hallways where students she had passed for 3 years without exchanging a word began occasionally stopping speaking, connecting in the brief, real way that people connect when something has cracked open, the social architecture they'd been living inside without examining it. Priya filed a formal report. So did Marcus. So did 4 of the 9 students whose names Emma had collected that Saturday morning. The university established a dedicated intake process for affected students, staffed by independent advocates rather than internal administrators, which was one of Eleanor Voss's conditions, and which made the process feel less like reporting to the institution that had failed you, and more like being heard by something separate from it. Daniel Brooks was asked by 2 different professors if he would present his methodology at a departmental seminar. He said yes to both and spent 3 days quietly panicking about public speaking, then delivered both presentations with the careful, precise confidence of someone who knows the material so completely that the nervousness has nowhere to get a foothold. Emma watched one of the presentations from the back of the room. Afterwards, she told him it was excellent. He said, I stumbled over the 3rd slide. She said, nobody noticed. He said, I noticed. She said, that's what makes you good at this. You notice everything. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I got an email this morning from a forensic accounting firm in San Francisco. They saw the university coverage. They want to talk to me about internship opportunities. Emma stared at him. Daniel, I know. I know, he said again, and this time he was smiling, not the almost smile of someone uncomfortable with recognition. An actual smile, the real kind. The board of Westbridge University met in emergency session on the 22nd day after the incident. The session was closed to the public, but its outputs were not. The board voted to implement a series of structural changes to dining services administration. an independent oversight committee with student representation, a transparent reporting system for meal plan, discrepancies, mandatory quarterly audits by a third-party firm rather than the internal team that had failed to catch what a 20-year-old with a free spreadsheet app had found in 4 months. They also voted to name the new scholarship Endowment Expansion, the fund that now held $400,000 and was growing as alumni responded to the story with donations of their own after no one. That was Michael Carter's specific request delivered through Dr. Bennett, delivered through Eleanor Voss, who had called Michael directly to discuss the naming. "You've contributed more than any individual donor this year," Eleanor had told him. "We'd like to acknowledge that." Michael had said, "I appreciate that, but I'd rather you put the name of every student it helps on the wall. That's the story that matters." Eleanor Voss had been silent for a moment. Then she said, "I'll see what we can do." What they did was this: they installed a board outside the dining hall at Morrison Hall. Not a plaque for a donor, a board the kind with individual slots for individual names, and on it, they placed the names of every scholarship student who had been affected by the dining service's failure, accompanied by a simple statement of what had happened and what had been done about it. Not to shame, not to perform accountability, but to make visible what had been made invisible. To say in the permanent language of institutional acknowledgement, these people were here. What happened to them was real. It will not be forgotten. The day they installed it, Emma went and stood in front of it for a long time. She found Priya's name. She found Marcus's name. She found Sophia's name, Sophia, who had dropped her premium meal plan rather than keep fighting, who was now a junior at Westbridge, and who had been one of the first students to receive a direct restitution payment from the new fund. She found her own name. She stood in front of it with her arms crossed and her jaw set, and she thought about the girl who had stood at the counter 3 weeks ago, holding her student ID card, holding back tears, holding herself together with the particular dignity of someone who knew that falling apart would give the wrong person exactly what they wanted. That girl had done nothing wrong. She deserved to be here. She always had. The phone call from Michael came that night at 8:47, which was not a Tuesday, which meant it was outside their regular schedule, which meant he had something specific he wanted to say. Emma answered. Hey, he said. "You see the board? I was there this afternoon." "Good, and Emma thought about the word. She turned it over, looking at it from different angles, checking it against what she actually felt rather than what felt like the right thing to say. "Yes," she said. "Good. Not perfect, but good." "Good is what you build on," Michael said. "That sounds like something you've said before." "Probably. I repeat myself. It's a dad thing." Emma smiled. She was sitting on her bed in the narrow dormitory room with the window cracked open and the night sounds of the campus coming in. Footsteps, voices, a bicycle, someone laughing 2 floors below. The same sounds she had been falling asleep to for 3 years. They sounded slightly different tonight. Not louder, not softer, just differently shaped somehow. Like the room they were traveling through had changed its acoustics slightly. "Dad," she said. "Yeah. I want to ask you something and I need you to give me a real answer." "Always." "The money, the scholarships, the fund, all of it." She paused. "Is it guilt?" A long silence. Michael Carter was not someone who answered questions quickly when the question deserved a slow answer. She had learned this about him early, that his pauses were not discomfort, were not evasion, were not the gathering of a better performance. They were the actual time it took him to check himself honestly and report back accurately. He said, "Some of it, yeah." Emma said nothing. "I didn't go to college," he said. "I had the grades. I had one acceptance letter, community college, not anything like Westbridge, but something. I didn't go because we needed money and I was the oldest, and I made a choice that made sense for that moment and that I spent the next 20 years second guessing." He paused again. "So yes, some of what I do comes from knowing what it takes when the ground isn't there, from not wanting that cost to land on other people if I can prevent it." "That's not nothing," Emma said. "No," he said, "but it's not the whole thing either. The other part is simpler. It's just I've met a lot of people in my life, in the shop, on the road, in the club, everywhere, and the ones who work hardest, who want it most, who will make the most of what they're given, they're usually the ones with the least ground under them. That's not fair. And I can't fix the whole thing, but I can shore up a piece of it." He was quiet. "So I do." Emma pressed her hand against her sternum the way she did when something sat in her chest too large and needed somewhere to go. You know what I've been thinking about, she said. Tell me. When this is all done, when the investigation is closed and the legal stuff is resolved and everything settles back into something like normal, I want to do something that's not just reactive, not just responding to what went wrong. She took a breath. There are students here who are going through exactly what I was going through, and they don't have a Daniel keeping records for them, and they don't have a dad who will drive 400 miles on a Friday morning. I want to build something for them. What kind of something? I don't know exactly yet. A peer support network maybe. Something where scholarship students can actually talk to each other, not just bond over struggling, but actually share information. Know their rights, know who to contact when something feels wrong, know that other people are watching, she paused, so that the next time a Victoria Hayes decides nobody is keeping track, someone is. Michael was quiet for a moment. Then he said, you need funding for that. Dad, no, absolutely not. I'm just asking. I'm not taking your money for this one, Emma said firmly. This one I build myself. She heard him exhale. Not disappointment, something else. The particular exhale of a parent who has just been shown clearly and undeniably that their child is going to be all right. Not in the surface way, not in the everything works out way, but in the deep way, the structural way, the way that holds when things get hard again, as things always do. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. Tuesday I'll call. I'll be here. She hung up the phone and sat in the quiet of her room and looked at the window and at the night beyond it. She thought about the morning this had all started. The 5:45 alarm. The cracked flip-flop strap held together with duct tape. The exam she'd prepared 9 days for and walked out of feeling quietly confident. The hunger that had taken her to Morrison Hall. The counter. The look. The 5 words. Students like you should know your place. She thought about her place. Her place was here. Not because a donor wrote a check, not because a father walked through a door, not because a video went viral or an investigation confirmed what she had always known. Her place was here because she had earned it with the 5:45 alarms, in the 12-hour study sessions, in the library shifts, in the yellowed flashcards, in the 3.87 GPA, built one exam at a time, over 3 years of doing the work even when the work was lonely. Nobody had given her that, and nobody could take it. 2 months later, Westbridge University held its annual scholarship student recognition dinner. It was a formal event, the kind with round tables and speeches and a program printed on heavy cardstock. Emma had attended the previous 2 years and sat near the back and eaten the rubber chicken and applauded politely and gone home early because she had studying to do. This year was different. This year she was one of the speakers. She stood at the podium in the university's main event hall and looked out at the room at the scholarship students in their seats, at the faculty and administrators along the sides, at Dr. Bennett in the front row, and Eleanor Voss beside him, and at a table near the back where Daniel Brooks was sitting next to Priya and Marcus and Sophia and 5 other students whose names were on the board outside Morrison Hall. She looked at her father, who was sitting at the same table in a dress shirt he had clearly purchased for the occasion. The price tag ghost still faintly visible at the collar, with his Hell's Angels vest folded over the back of his chair where he could still reach it if he needed to, which Emma found so perfectly, completely him, that she had to press her lips together for a moment before she started. She looked at all of them, and then she said what she had come to say. I want to talk about a calculation, she said. Not the kind we do in accounting or economics, though I think Daniel Brooks could tell you that the two are more related than they seem. A small laugh from the Daniel table. Daniel himself was looking at his water glass. I'm talking about the calculation that scholarship students run every single day on this campus, Emma said. The one that goes, is it worth it to say something? Is it worth it to push back? Is it worth it to fight this particular thing today when I have 3 exams next week and rent due on the 15th and exactly 0 margin for error? That calculation, the one that most of the people in the comfortable seats, she said it without heat, without accusation, just as a statement of geographic fact, have never had to run. The room was quiet. 2 months ago, I ran that calculation at a lunch counter, Emma said. I ran it and I decided to walk away. Not because I was weak, because I was practical. Because I had already survived 1,000 small versions of the same moment and I knew how to absorb this one and keep moving. She paused. What I didn't know was that my father was about to walk through the door. She looked at Michael. He was looking at the dress shirt buttons. He walked in and he stood where I had been standing and he asked the question I had decided wasn't worth asking, she said. And because of who he is and what he'd built and the weight he carried in that room, the question got answered. And then a lot of other questions got answered and things changed. She let that sit for a moment. Here's what I've been thinking about since then, she said. What about the students whose fathers couldn't drive 400 miles on a Friday? What about the students who made the same calculation I made and walked away and never had anyone walk back in for them? What about Sophia, who dropped her meal plan because the friction of fighting was more expensive than the meal? What about every student who correctly determined that the cost of being right was higher than the cost of staying quiet? The room was very still. Those students didn't lose because they were wrong, Emma said. They lost it because nobody was watching. Nobody was keeping track. Nobody was there. She looked at Daniel. Except one person, she said, who spent 4 months in a library with a free spreadsheet app keeping track of something nobody asked him to keep track of for people he barely knew. Because he had the skills to see what was happening, and he decided that seeing it and doing nothing was not something he was willing to do. Daniel was definitely not looking at his water glass anymore. I am building something, Emma said. Starting next semester, a peer network for scholarship students at this university, not a club, not a support group in the soft sense, but an actual operational network. Information sharing, rights education, a reporting channel that goes around the standard administrative structure when the standard structure is the problem. A way for students to know that other people are watching even when the people who are supposed to be watching aren't. She paused. I'm building it with my own time, my own energy, and my own money, which is to say very little money. If anyone in this room wants to help you, can find me after dinner. She looked at Eleanor Voss for exactly 1 second. Eleanor Voss nodded exactly once. And if anyone from the administration wants to support it rather than manage it, I'm open to that conversation. On the condition that student leadership makes the decisions. Full stop. She looked out at the room one more time. My father told me something before I came to Westbridge, she said. He told me that the students from wealthy families were here to maintain what they already had, and that I was here to build something that didn't exist yet. She let the words land. I spent 3 years thinking he meant a career, a future for myself, something that would make my own life better. She looked at him directly now, at the dress shirt and the vest folded over the chair, and the expression on his face that she knew better than almost any other expression in the world. The one where he was trying not to let something show and failing just slightly in the best possible way. I think he meant something bigger than that, she said. I think he always did. The room was quiet for a moment that lasted just long enough to be felt. Then it wasn't quiet anymore. The applause started at the Daniel table and spread not politely, not as performance, but with the specific warmth of people who have heard something that confirms something they already believed in some private part of themselves and are grateful to have it said out loud. Emma stepped back from the podium. She walked to her table. She sat down next to her father, and he put his arm around her shoulders, and he leaned close and said something in her ear that nobody else could hear. Something that she would carry for the rest of her life without ever writing down, because some things don't need to be written down to be permanent. Outside the campus was doing what campuses do at night, humming with the low continuous energy of thousands of young lives running simultaneously, each one building something that didn't exist yet, each one carrying calculations and costs and private reserves of strength that the people around them could not fully see. The board outside Morrison Hall had all the names on it. The fund had $463,000 in it. Now, as of that morning, after a quiet donation from an alumnus in Chicago who had read the story and remembered something about his own years at Westbridge that he had been carrying for a long time. Victoria Hayes had a court date scheduled for the following spring. Daniel Brooks had accepted the internship offer. Priya was passing her chemistry exams with marks. She was genuinely proud of eating lunch in Morrison Hall every single day, always at a table near the window, always with her student ID card visible on the table in front of her, like a small and private act of occupation. And Emma Carter, who had woken up at 5:45 with a cracked flip-flop strap and an exam to take, and a hunger that had taken her to the wrong counter at the wrong moment, which turned out to be exactly the right moment. Emma Carter had a meeting scheduled for Monday morning with 4 students who wanted to help her build something that didn't exist yet, something that would be there for the people who came after, who would use it without knowing her name, which was exactly the point. She had learned that from her father.